So before we start creating our UVs, we need to model the tongue because I've forgotten to do this before. So I will add a UV sphere with 16 segments and 12 rings. That should be enough. I will name it properly. Then I will cut it in half to be able to add a mirror modifier. I will align its topology toward the front and place one pole on the back of the throat and the other part pointing toward the teeth. Now using sculpt mode, I'm just slightly shaping it. So this will be really fast. I'm just trying to conform it to the mouth cavity. Then I will go into edit mode, isolate it. I can now prepare it to add the mirror modifier as told before, add it, and then I will smooth things out and try to get some kind of a better shape, trying to have this nice crease in the middle. So I'm not really watching at references, that's a pretty simple shape to be done. I will finally get rid of triangles on the front side because it makes those poles that are not really beautiful to watch, and it might make the shading looking not really good. So that's a little something with just removing them and recreating the tip of the tongue using diamond shapes, and then I will just smooth it out. Smooth also the border to avoid this kind of edgy things, and try to define the center line, center crease, as I told you before. We'll start our UVs by working on the body. So we will have, I believe, 3 different UV sets. I don't remember exactly, but one with the body, teeth, and tongue. The eyes will be separated, and another one we will have the whole armor, another one with leather parts and clothes, and finally one with the weapon and the shield. So for the first one, I will be working kind of the classic way, and for the armor, we'll be using the Atlas add-on, which is in the trunk of Blender, but we get back to this a little later on. So first thing first, in the UV image editor, I will create a new test map using 2K resolution and the UV grid, so that we have this checkboard pattern that will help us dealing with distortions. Then I'm creating a new shader for my character. I will press Ctrl T to load texture coordinates with the node wrangler, get rid of those, and then I will be able to swap to texture mode. But for the time being, it's not necessary as our character is not unwrapped. So I will go into edit mode and use edge selection and start creating my seams that will help UV unwrapping my mesh. So I generally start with obvious part like the end, so we need to separate them from the arm. That's not necessary, but I prefer to do so, and since it will be covered with armor, we can cut them pretty high. So I've selected the loop around the wrist, and also selecting the edge loop that go on the center of our fingers, the one we have defined during retopology. I will mark it as seams and then mirror the selection and do the same mark seam on the other side. I will then separate the legs by selecting this loop and then mirroring it. So I will make a slight turn around the butt here. Make sure everything is selected and I have a closed loop. Separate my mesh in half, selecting those two edges and mirroring it. Now I can select the loop inside the leg because we'll need to unwrap it entirely. So it's better to cut it in half and select the loop around the ankle as we did for the wrist. So I think I will select it a little upper as I have a clean loop here. Control E mark seam, then select and mirror it. Then I will separate the bottom of the foot by selecting this crossing edge and select the back of the foot so that the upper part of the foot will be able to get unfolded and unwrapped correctly. So now you can imagine the flat part getting projected and the top of the foot getting unwrapped around it. So now I have to figure where I will make my other cuts. So we definitively need to separate the arms from the body following the shoulder. So I'm trying to get the good edge loop to do so, and this one seems to be cool as it is connected to this other edge loop. So when you think about the arm and the legs, you can imagine two cylinders, and here we're just selecting the caps to get rid of them, and then we'll cut a vertical edge loop to be able to unwrap our cylinder. So I will select something inside the arm here as I have a good loop running down the wrist to the shoulder. So make sure that there is no vertices missing to totally cut our cylinder shape. So I will also think of the chest as a cylinder, but this time I will separate it in two pieces. So I will cut an edge loop on each side by marking the seams here and there, and then we'll separate the shoulders and the neck. We could keep the back and the chest attached going on the shoulder, and we would get a very nice UV with very little stretching, but the problem is that it's more comfortable, I believe, to work with the chest separated from the back when you are creating your UV map, because you have more mobility than with a very big UV island. So I'm just cutting the neck here. So think when you have those poles to zoom in, make sure that your seams are closed. This is something I sometimes met this problem, and you can see your UVs going a bit wild, and generally this is because you have forgotten one edge to be marked as seam. So here I'm separating the back from the front area. So in this video I'm assuming you know what is UV unwrapping. This is a very basic stuff here, so I hope you've already done this before and you know why we are creating those UVs. These are to separate our different parts of our mesh when creating our UV islands. So now I will try to separate the hair from the head. So you've seen that I just missed a little edge, and I didn't notice this before. So I will sure have some distortion on the hair when I will unwrap it, but I should be able to fix it later and see it later. So for the time being I will separate the inside of the hair from the outside as if it was a cylinder, just like for the arm, but this time a cylinder getting out of the head on each side. So the first cap is the head mesh, and the second cap is this ring here. And then I will just cut on the back of the here, so that it will unwrap as would a cylinder. Don't forget to mirror your selection once you have created your seams, because you will save some time. Here I've forgotten, so I will have to reselect everything. I can proceed the same way for the horns, splitting the base, then trying to find a good loop that goes from the top to the bottom of the horn, so that I can split it as we did for our cylinder. But for the tip of the horn, I will keep an edge free from being a seam right here, just like it was a cube mesh, so that it can be unwrapped as a single piece, but we need all vertices that has 390-degree angles on each face they are sourced from to be unwrapped like this. So I can mark our seams the scalp. We will separate both back and scalp of the head from the front face, so then I will also add seams just upon the ears. But for the time being, we can easily separate a nostril, also separate the eyes, so eyelashes, using those loops. We can also do the same for the mouth, so for the time being, I will just hide part of the lips here to access the inner loop of the mouth, so that it will be easier to mark it. I will also unstretch a bit the chin, so I know this will be stretching, so this is the kind of stuff you get to know when you're used to this kind of thing, but adding some cut to unstress some area. Switching to face selection mode, pressing L hovering over part of the body, you can see that now Blender is selecting the UV island. So I can easily check if my islands are closed and isolate them. So now I can select both those edges and mark them as seams. You could have selected only one of them or use the vertical one to separate the inside of the mouth in two pieces as the cylinder. I can now press A to select everything, U and unwrap, and I should have those islands appearing in the UV image editor, where in the end panel I will enable stretching. So this will allow me to see if my islands are clean and not too stretched. There will always be a bit of stretching, but we can see if there isn't that much bugs, if there isn't any very reddish area. The closer you are to blue, the cleaner are your islands. So here they are pretty clean in the first shot. I prefer to use area-based stretching than angle stretching. Area-based stretching will turn bad if your angle-based stretching is not good. And the thing is that with the area stretching, you also get the information about the difference of size of your faces compared to the other. So if you have made one island too big, for example, if you are unwrapping stuff one by one, you will see it, because as you change its size, you will see it changing of color. We'll see this a little later. Here I was struggling to get a good preview of my texture object while the texture was enabled in the shader, and this is because in the display option of the object I have forgotten to switch on textured, This is by default on texture, but I've modified it along the way to solid. So now it gets back to texture. When dealing with UVs using this checkboard pattern, your goal will be to get rid of distortion. So the square of the checkboard pattern must be as clean as possible, and try to make the whole body having the same density of this checkboard. This is the texel density. So this is the number of pixels for an object surface. And we can enhance this working on the UVs. So for the time being, I'm working on the mouth, and I will, using the proportional editing fall-off in the UV image editor, reduce the whole of the mouth, which is lost space, because this is an empty space that is covering texture information, so we will lose texel density here. Let's talk a little bit about texel density. So texel density is the number of pixels that are covered by your UV island. So if I scale this down, I will have a bad texel density, meaning from all my UV space here, I'm covering just a very little area. But if I scale it up, now I get a better scale density. If I try to unwrap it with another way, separating all faces here, I will have a very good, let's say the best texel density possible for this mesh, as every faces are separated and covering the space they need. And if I switch here to stretch area, I can see that it's all blue, meaning that I don't have any stretching. And if we want to see the stretching here, based on the area, if I scale down this, you can see it turning red, and also the other change of color, because now I don't have the same density of pixels on my whole mesh. While the angle stretching is good, and this is what I've told you before. I have a good angle stretching, but the area stretching is not good. And if I change here this angle and making it stretch, I can see stretching here, and I also can see it here. That's why I prefer to work with area stretching, because generally if you have some stretching here, you will have it in area stretching. I can have no stretching on the angle base, but still have it in the area. So as soon as you have stretching on area, it means there is stretching in your wall mesh. So with this in mind, I will slightly enlarge the nose area to get some bluish color, meaning that my area stretching is better, is reduced actually. And then to reduce the stretching on the mouth, I will switch to UV sculpting. So it's like sculpting with the grab brush and the smooth brush. So when I hold shift and click, it will automatically smooth area, which is very handy to get rid of stretching in certain part of the mesh without going into too much editing. We can't avoid having stretching on certain areas, such as the corner of the mouth, the corner of the eyes, or stuff like this. But as soon as those areas are occluded, that's not really important. What you need to have is something as smooth as possible, but don't get bogged down if you can't get rid of those reddish faces everywhere. It doesn't matter. Inside of the ears here, I'm just smoothing a little bit, but this is not really important because those will be hidden parts of the mesh. So I'm just making a little bit of scooting around my UV island, just checking that I don't have big distortion. I can also check this directly onto the mesh, verifying that this checkboard pattern is nice and even. So I can now I can now start unwrapping the other organic part of our character that will be on the same UV island. I will just join the upper teeth and upper gum together and do the same for the bottom ones, and go into unwrapping the tongue, which will be the easiest part to be unwrapped. I will just select the center edge loop and unwrap it. Then I've loaded the UV shader on it, and I'm just checking that it's looking nice. I will now unwrap the gum. So I go for the inside of the mouth, and then I will unwrap the teeth as if they were a cube. So I'm selecting, as I did before, corner edges like this, and this should be okay. You can see that I have some even UV island here. Very nice. So I can repeat this on the upper part. The eyes will have their own UV island, because that will be easier to deal with while shading and also texture painting them. So I'm separating the cornea, and I will cut the sclera in 2 pieces. So at the very beginning I was going for only 1 piece, but it turned a bit too stretched, I believe. I think I've modified it later on. And for the iris area, as it's a cylinder based without any cap, we can unwrap it as it is. Even if the very center of it will be very stretched, as it will be painted in black, because it is supposed to be the iris currently, it will be very occluded, so we don't really care if we have stretching in the middle. So instead of marking seams on the side, as it's the side of the eye will be oftenly seen when our character will open them, I prefer to mark seams on top and bottom of it. Now I will just check if my texel density is good. I will put both iris one on top of each other, trying to match them as clean as possible. And I will make this part a little bigger, because this is something where there are a lot of detail. So this will mess a little bit with my area stretching, but it doesn't really matter, as we have very simple shapes here. This is going to be pretty easy to scale them properly to cover the maximum of surface here. When it comes to organizing UV island, always start with the biggest part. Try to make them as close as possible one to each other, but avoid absolutely any crossing. That will be very problematic. We'll be covering UV island editing more in depth on more complex parts. To make our UV island editing a little more easy, I will edit my user preferences to make them appearing in a greenish color, which isn't used generally. So I will go into the user preferences interface, go into the UV image editor and change the color here. This will be way easier to see, so that's a little tip. As I want to gather the gums, tongue and body on the same UV island, I will make a copy of them, move them on another layer, select them and join them to the body. So now when I go into edit mode, I get this very nasty UV map, and this is because we haven't scaled accordingly the gums, teeth and tongue based on the size of the body. So what I need to do is select them and just scale them down until they get the right bluish color, and that's it. This means that the size of the gum, teeth, etc. is relatively close to the body size. Once I'm done scaling the separated parts, I can unhide everything, select everything, and move all the island out of the UV space. Now to organize them, I will select the biggest pieces first, and I will lay them down onto the UV space, trying to cover as much space as possible. During this process, you will use the grab and rotate function, but you must not use the scaling option, because here we have nice and even islands. If we start to scale them to make them fit betterly, we will mess up with our area stretching. When setting my UV island, I try to make them fit this square shape so that I have free space around this big island, and then I will be able to scale them up so that they cover more space, and so that we will have a very good texel density. And I'll show it to you a little later on. So I finished my UV island editing, moving the smallest part, and now I can set the 3D cursor in one angle and scale them until I reach the boundaries of the UV map. And now I can try to move some pieces that were outside of the boundaries. And here I believe I will have a very good texel density, meaning that I'm covering almost the whole UV space with my edited UVs. So there are still some tweaking to be done, but that should be okay. Once I'm done with UV editing, I will get out of edit mode and transfer my UVs to our original mesh, the one with the multi-resolution modifier, and also to the teeth, gum, and tongue. To do so, we first need to separate all the features, which I didn't do here. I made a try and it doesn't work, because Blender needs to have two meshes with the exact same topology and same number of polygons. So I'm separating everything by loose parts. I will then move them on the side, then move them on the same layer as my target mesh. I will first select the target mesh, then the UV unwrapped one, and press Ctrl L, transfer UVs. And now when I enter edit mode, I can see all the UVs that are clean. So I repeat, select first the target, then the master, let's say, transfer UVs, select my original mesh, and now I can see he has the same UVs. So I can repeat this for the different parts. So this is the hard way, let's say, to set up multiple UVs at once. Thanks to the Atlas add-on that we will be using for the hammer, this will be way easier.